In the forest, Carmen is covered in blood and trying to cut the zip tie tying her wrists. Sometimes she dissociates and repeats the words "murder maker" while a black dog watches from afar. When the zip tie finally breaks, she hears snarling and runs away. In a farm nearby, Maggie and her son Arlo capture a wasp in a teacup, and Maggie says they now have a tempest in a cup. In the kitchen, Maggie's mother-in-law Ellen hears the radio make a weird piercing noise for a second before the music comes back to normal. Then Maggie takes the teacup outside where her husband James mentions that the goats have been spooked by something. He also says they should talk about what's going on between them, but Maggie says she isn't ready. After releasing the wasp outside Arlo's window, Maggie heads to the stables, where the horses are all freaking out. Meanwhile, Arlo sees a goat escaping into the woods and goes after it while Carmen watches him from behind the trees. In the evening, Maggie goes looking for Arlo and can't find him. Nobody has seen him, but they assume he's hiding, which he does often. At that moment, their neighbor Ruben and his family show up with their horse, who has been freaking out too and hurt his head in the process. Since Maggie is a vet, she agrees to take the horse to her clinic with Ruben while the others stay to look for Arlo. Ellen hears the screeching noise in the radio again, and Ruben's son Nicholas mentions he also heard it earlier. Arlo's sister Meryl has noticed that a goat is missing, and Ruben's wife Valeria shares that another neighbor was missing a dog too. At the clinic, Maggie finds a huge splinter in the horse's body, but thankfully it didn't cut through any blood vessels. In the forest, Arlo is still following the goat when suddenly Carmen appears behind him mumbling weird words in English and Spanish. Soon the families also enter the woods to search for Arlo. Meryl and Nicholas hear a noise and notice a shadow among the trees. Nearby, James and Valeria are also searching while discussing their old affair, which Maggie doesn't know about. They're interrupted by the teens, who have found the missing dog and the goat. There are more snarling noises coming from the trees and they see some kind of animal run by. Thinking it's a coyote, James tells everyone to go back to the house. Somewhere else in the forest, Arlo is unconscious with strange marks on his body. When he wakes up, he finds Carmen roaring at his face. A rainbow light appears on her eyes and Arlo's eyes copy it. The families return to the house as Donald and his wife Claire show up to pick up their dog. Donald explains the animal in the woods wasn't a coyote but a big dog, probably rabbit. He also takes out his gun, announcing he wants to hunt the beast down. James disapproves of the idea, but their argument is interrupted when Arlo finally returns. After mumbling the same nonsense words as Carmen, he collapses. In the woods, Carmen is now lucid and begging for help. However, the beast finds her and kills her. In town, a person in a gas mask sprays a line of blue paint on the street. Back to the families, they notice the lights in the house flickering and the dog won't stop barking at the woods. They want to take Arlo to the hospital, but none of their cars are working, and their phones have no signal. While everyone goes into the house, Donald points out someone hurt Arlo, so he'll go looking for that person before they escape. In the bathroom, Arlo is feeling better and talking normally. His wounds are minor and he doesn't remember what happened. Suddenly he says they need to go and starts repeating the weird words including "murder maker." Then he tries to run away and bumps against Nicholas, causing him to hurt his head. Maggie goes after Arlo and holds him down until he passes out again. Meanwhile, James and Ruben are getting two horses ready to go to town for help when they notice a car on the road with the lights on. They run towards it and meet the masked man, who makes a gesture to make them freeze before pointing at the blue line on the ground. Then he holds up a board that says "Don't cross the line." James tries to explain the situation and ask for help, only for the man to take out a gun to keep them at bay. He makes a new drawing on the board that reveals the blue line as a circle surrounding the area. When James tries approaching him again, the man fires a warning shot. In the house, Arlo suddenly grabs some scissors to attack Maggie while repeating the weird words. She runs to block the door to stop him from leaving again, then she disarms him and holds him until he goes back to normal. Arlo admits he's scared, so Maggie sings him a comforting song. As Arlo sings along, he puts a bunch of marbles on the floor and places an inverted teacup on top of them. After pointing at the word "trap" on a dictionary, he tells Maggie that the man in his head is telling them to hide because it's coming and it kills everything in its way. In the woods, Donald keeps on searching when he suddenly trips on something, which happens to be Carmen's body. He drops his gun in the process, and when he turns around to look for it, he finds the big black dog growling at him. Donald starts walking away slowly, but the dog chases after him anyway. They reach the area where his friends and the masked man are standing, and Donald goes through the fence to escape. Unfortunately, he falls and the dog jumps on him to attack. A fight ensues and Donald manages to throw the dog off, making him fall across the line. All the men watch in shock how the dog's bones start coming out of his body until he dies. The masked man puts his board up again, reminding them not to cross the line. James demands an explanation, but the masked man only writes "Don't trust anyone" and leaves in his car. At the house, Claire announces she's going home with her dog because she has a landline phone that should work. The men are on their way back and see her come out, so they try to warn her, but it's too late. As the dog runs away from the line in fear, Claire crosses it and her bones snap out, killing her in seconds. Donald tries to reach his wife and his hand starts losing skin, so the other guys have to pull him back. The next morning, Donald is still sitting outside staring at his wife's body. Inside, Maggie asks Meryl to look after Arlo while she discusses the situation with James. He wants to cross the woods to check on their neighbors the Navarros, and Maggie tells him to take Ruben, but James refuses. This causes Maggie to reveal she knows about James' affair with Valeria, which is overheard by Ruben. James admits it's true but insists that the affair is over and he loves Maggie. He also apologizes, but it's not enough. Afterward, Ruben doesn't tell anyone that he knows and gives Maggie a gun before joining James for the trip. They leave on their horses, and after just a few minutes of riding, they find a snake that crossed the line and died a gruesome death. Meanwhile, Ellen and Valeria cover Claire's body with a blanket while Maggie takes Donald into the house. She bandages his injury and gives him a medicine injection that was made for animals. Donald tells her about the body in the woods. In the rooms upstairs, Meryl and Nicholas find Arlo learning words from a dictionary. Nicholas asks Arlo who he is, and Arlo replies that he is the Harbinger, while the real Arlo is asleep and resting. The Harbinger says they are trapped and grabs Meryl's hand, pulling as he insists they must hide or die. In the struggle, Meryl falls over and knocks a glass of water that spills over a rainbow drawing. Seeing the colors spread gives the Harbinger an idea, and he says that they aren't truly trapped. He tries to take Meryl out with him, but she doesn't let him, so Arlo wakes up to tell her she must listen to the Harbinger because the assassin is coming. After lots of begging from Arlo, Meryl and Nicholas agree to follow him into the woods, but Nicholas brings a knife just in case. The boy becomes the Harbinger again and takes them to a spot where the ground looks burnt up and animals are lying dead. He says this is mine and points to the sky, claiming that's where he came from. There's some rainbow-colored liquid on a rock and the Harbinger collects it in a jar. He explains it's poison, but he still wants them to drink it. If they drink just enough, they'll be able to walk over the line. If they drink too much, they'll die, and if they don't drink, the assassin will kill them. Meryl announces they're going home, and on their way back, Nicholas admits he's liked her since second grade. Feeling awkward, Meryl changes the subject by asking the Harbinger to bring Arlo out. She then asks her brother about the entity's motives, and he says the Harbinger is on a secret mission. Before she can ask more, they hear a car and run away. Outside the house, Ellen and Valeria are chatting, and Ellen reveals she knows about the affair, so Valeria admits she's unsatisfied by the farmer's life with Ruben. At that moment, they see a van stop nearby and Lieutenant Olsen comes out. Ignoring the women's warnings, he crosses the line and says this is the easy part, but leaving it's the problem. Back to Ruben and James, they reach the Navarro's house and split to search the area. Ruben sees the dog staring at the silo door and scares them off before going through that door. James finds the neighbors' dead bodies plus a pool with water before he enters the house, where he finds another body. Suddenly he hears something in the basement, and when he steps on the stairs, someone drags him and pulls him down. At the same time, Maggie goes into the forest to look for the body Donald saw and recognizes the woman as Carmen Navarro. At the house, Olsen tells Ellen and Valeria he knows what's happening and he's here to help. At that moment, Maggie arrives and tells them what she saw, so Olsen explains his job was to find and isolate Carmen. He asks if anyone has come into contact with Carmen while she was alive, and when he hears about Arlo, he asks to see him. While Maggie takes him upstairs, Olsen explains he's a policeman and part of a large task force made up of cops, army, and marines. All they know is that some kind of vibration is outside the line, which complex organisms like animals and humans can't survive. A suspicious Maggie wonders if Olsen's task force killed Carmen, but he swears he just got here. She doesn't believe him because she saw that Carmen had restraint marks on her wrists, so Olsen admits he lied and says the only way to survive is taking him to her son. Since she refuses, Olsen tries to attack, but Maggie quickly knocks him out with her gun. Afterward, the women tie Olsen up in the barn. Maggie checks his things and finds zip tie, so she's sure he's lying about his identity. While they discuss liars, Valeria realizes Maggie knows about the affair and swears it's over. At that moment, Olsen wakes up and asks for Arlo, saying they're running out of time. After a furious Maggie leaves, Olsen tries to manipulate Valeria into believing he's here to help. They're interrupted by Ellen, who can't find the kids. Valeria wants to go looking for them, so she leaves Ellen guarding Olsen with a gun. In the meantime, Maggie rushes to her clinic and has a panic attack, so Donald shares comforting words and helps her calm down. In the woods, the kids come across a different masked man holding a sign that tells them not to cross the line. When he sees the jar, he tells them to hand it over, but the kids refuse. The man then fights Nicholas, and after some struggle, Nicholas stabs him while the jar falls and breaks. Meryl rushes to cover the guy's wound and removes his mask, causing him to recognize the Harbinger as the being that had been in Carmen. The man says his name is McNabb and swears he's here to help the Harbinger. In the barn, Olsen convinces Ellen to wipe the blood from his eye. When she comes closer, he opens his mouth wide and transfers the entity to Ellen. Now possessed, Ellen shoots Olsen dead. Then he frees him and gets a wound on her forehead to make it look like Olsen attacked her. At the Navarros, the dogs are barking at the silo door again. Inside, Ruben has found a tree covered in rainbow lights. At first he tries to ignore it, but eventually he gives in and reaches out to touch it. Before he can do so, a spider lands on his hand and the light immediately kills it. Outside, the dogs have calmed down. In the basement, James wakes up to find his hands tied. Nearby, Travis takes off his mask to smoke. He can barely walk because he's wounded, but he still grabs his gun and asks James to give him a good reason not to shoot him. James tells him about Arlo and the line, but Travis explains it's impossible to tell who is a real human and who is an alien, so he shares his story. Travis had been a bartender working at a bar where McNabb was drinking. In his inebriated state, McNabb kept talking about some visitors from space and an invisible death trap. When the other clients laughed, he showed a scar on his arm to prove his story. Since McNabb was getting aggressive, the boss made Travis drive him home. During the trip, McNabb told Travis that the death trap had an incandescent power source that drew you in. Eventually, Travis dropped McNabb home and stayed outside to have a cigarette, noticing some signs nearby with ominous messages. At that moment, an orange car stopped for a second before speeding off again. Then he heard some weird noises in the house, so Travis went inside to check. He found a bunch of masks on the table and McNabb sleeping. Travis opened a drawer and stole a knife before McNabb woke up to point his gun at him. He quickly put it down though, saying he could tell Travis believed him. From then on, Travis started to spend time with McNabb to hear more about these visitors, who came to Earth in meteors and took over human bodies. Some visitors were good, but others were evil. If a bad one showed up first, then a good one would follow to hunt it down. Soon Olsen joined them and taught Travis how to shoot a gun. He used their pictures as targets so Travis could learn to kill a friend if they became possessed. Olsen confirmed he used to be a cop, but he dropped out. The men explained that shooting will kill the host, but not the alien. They suspected that a woman named Mary had been possessed by a bad visitor. Two friends of theirs had been following her for 2 years and they noticed there were no deviations from her routine until 2 weeks ago when she became really active. She bought a gun, zip ties, and other gear, which probably means she's getting ready for the arrival of a good visitor. That night, Travis is still a bit unsure about the whole visitor deal, so McNabb told him the story of how his daughter was possessed by a good visitor. A bad visitor took her from him and made her drink the rainbow liquid to force her to cross the line. When McNabb tried following them, he hurt his arm at the line. Eventually the trap disappeared and so did the visitors, leaving his daughter's dead body in a dumpster. Then McNabb gave Travis a sample of the rainbow liquid, which Travis kept on a necklace around his neck. Sometime later, the trio was keeping watch when Travis saw the same orange car. However, Olsen explained that wasn't Mary, it was a former team member who Travis was replacing. After the car left, Mary showed up in her van and released a black dog in the forest. The guys followed the van to the Navarro's house, where they immediately identified Carmen as a good visitor. Mary entered the house with the family, so the men put on the masks to follow them. McNabb put up a sign at the window and told Travis to get the pool ready. Olsen and McNabb burst into the house and Travis could hear a fight going on while he took a kiddie pool from the car and filled it with water. He also left a note with instructions on how to resuscitate a drowning victim. At that moment, a man came out of the house with the dogs and Mary shot him. After killing the other Navarro family members inside the house, Mary went to the empty silo and poured rainbow liquid on the ground. McNabb came out of the house with Carmen, whose wrists had been tied up. Unfortunately, he lost his grip and Carmen ran into the woods. The liquid in the silo started to grow into a tree and McNabb realized Mary was setting up the trap, so he rushed to his car and left without his friends. Travis tried calling McNabb's phone, but he could only hear a screeching sound that hurt his ear. Mary heard him and came over to transfer the visitor to him. A possessed Travis grabbed a piece of wood to hit her head and Mary responded by shooting him twice. After a few seconds she was dead, and Travis was throwing up blood. At that moment Olsen came out too and tried to help Travis, only for the visitor to jump into his body. A terrified Travis ran into the house and stayed in the basement since then. In the present, Travis finishes his story and explains the only person who can stop the trap is the visitor that made it. He also says that he doesn't want to die alone, but James convinces him to release him. After throwing his knife at James, Travis decides to self-delete. In the silo, the tree blocks the door to stop Ruben from leaving. James comes looking for him and shoots his gun in the air to scare the dogs away. Ruben yells back to reveal his location and James opens the silo door, only for the tree to close it again. A desperate James grabs an axe and makes a hole in the wall to pull his friend out, only for Ruben to tackle him and punch him a few times for the affair. James apologizes but also reminds him they must leave this for later. The duo gets on their horses and enter the forest, where they find the kids with McNabb. Back in the house, Maggie takes care of Ellen's injury, who tries to transfer the visitor to her. However, they're interrupted by Valeria announcing the return of their families. Meryl helps Maggie treat McNabb and Arlo says he's one of the good ones. Donald tells James everything about Olsen while looking at the position of the body, and since they know Travis' story, they realize the bad visitor is now in Ellen. Meanwhile, Nicholas tells his parents everything and Ruben asks to be taken to McNabb's car. While the family walks through the woods, Ruben confesses he knows about the affair. Valeria cries as she apologizes, swearing that it's over. Their fight is interrupted by Nicholas, who has found the broken jar with rainbow liquid in it. Ruben gets bewitched by it and doesn't snap out of it until a wolf appears to growl at them. The family steps back and the wolf goes to the jar to drink all the liquid, so Nicholas fires a warning shot to scare it away. The wolf runs off and crosses the line without getting hurt. Nearby, Nicholas finds McNabb's diary. In the house, Arlo tells Maggie and Meryl that the Harbinger's mission is to find a machine without waking up more assassins, who are the bad visitors hiding inside many people. Once he finds it, he can turn it on to get ready. At that moment McNabb wakes up and says the visitors are getting ready for an invasion, so he pulls out his gun. This is seen by Donald, who runs to warn James. McNabb says he can't trust anyone and wants to take Arlo away to safety. James comes in and starts arguing with McNabb, who loses control and opens fire right as Donald enters the room too. Donald is shot down and James tackles McNabb, who easily throws him off and runs away. James tries to follow him but he's already gone. Maggie checks on Donald, who is fine because he's wearing a bulletproof jacket under his jacket. Afterward everyone looks for Ellen but they can't find her. By nighttime, James tells his family to stay in the house while he and Donald continue the search in the forest. At that moment Ruben's family comes back and James tells them everything. Nicholas is sent inside too while Ruben and Valeria join the search. In the house, Maggie hears some noises and goes downstairs to check but doesn't find anything. Meanwhile Ruben searches the garage while Valeria waits outside, unaware someone is walking behind her. James looks through Maggie's clinic and also hears some noises, but when he opens the door he's simply startled by Donald's dog. In the stables Donald hears the horses freaking out and searches every corner until he finds a confused Ellen. Then everyone gathers in the living room and Ellen says she thinks the visitor has left her, which means it's inside somebody else now. An argument ensues about how to proceed and Nicholas shares what he found on McNabb's diary. An assassin can be removed from the host if the human drowns. In the morning, McNabb is ready to cross the line but remembers James mentioned Travis. He runs to the Navarro's house and takes the necklace with the liquid from Travis' body. Back to Maggie, she reads Travis' instruction sheet, which James brought from the Navarro's house. She leaves her room and discovers Valeria leaving breakfast for the kids, who are being protected by Nicholas. Outside the tension is high among the men, who get a fire going, hoping the smoke will call for help. Ruben is tired of waiting and walks off, so Donald follows him. Then Maggie comes to see James with the instructions and says she can't bring herself to drown anybody. James points out it's their only solution and they have another argument. In the kitchen, Valeria tries to make a map and a list of people who were alone with Ellen and starts getting ideas. Upstairs Nicholas keeps reading McNabb's diary with Meryl and learns that there's an underground resistance fighting the visitors. While reading about the visitor jumping from mouth to mouth, Nicholas and Meryl kiss. Meanwhile Donald follows Ruben to the Navarro's house, where he's throwing fuel at the silo to light it on fire. The flames devour the building incredibly quickly, but after the fire is out and only some wall wood is left, the tree is still standing there. Suddenly McNabb arrives to tell them they can try something else and shows them Travis' necklace. In the house, Meryl checks on Arlo and finds him drawing a zigzag line over and over again. She concludes that Harbinger is trying to draw a map. After checking dozens of maps in a book, Meryl finally discovers that Arlo's drawing matches the Belknap mountain. Meanwhile Valeria pulls Nicholas out of the house while claiming that she knows who the assassin is. She takes him to the edge of the blue line and gives him the sedative and the knife she found in Ellen's room. Then Valeria opens her mouth and transfers the visitor into Nicholas, who pushes her mother across the line and watches her die. At the Navarro's home, Ruben drinks the rainbow liquid from Travis' necklace. Now he can approach the tree without getting bewitched. He's wearing gloves but grabbing a branch still burns him rather painfully. Ruben doesn't give up and breaks the branch, then he runs back to his friends to put it in a jar where it immediately becomes liquid. At the same time Maggie and James discuss the drowning issue again, wondering how to resuscitate a person via CPR if the visitor travels through the mouth. Then James talks about Travis and how guilty he feels about not saving him. He and Maggie end up bonding over their fears and hold hands, hoping they can repair their relationship. In Arlo's room, he and Meryl discuss how to find the assassin and Arlo gets an idea by putting the teacup over only one marble. At that moment something hits the window and Meryl looks out to discover Nicholas telling her to come out. Meryl runs to him and Nicholas says his mom was the assassin, presenting the knife and sedative as proof. He pretends Valeria failed the transfer and when Meryl lowers her guard, Nicholas transfers the assassin to her. Then Mary knocks Nicholas out with a rock and goes back inside. All this is seen by Arlo at the window, who runs to warn his parents. When Meryl enters the house, Maggie points a gun at her. The girl is under the control of the assassin, who threatens to kill the host's body until Maggie puts down her weapon. She then tries to leave, only to be jumped on and captured by a masked James. While Maggie also puts her mask on and prepares the tub, Meryl fights her father to try to unmask him but she's not successful. Then the couple grabs her together and submerges her in the filled tub. They do their best to keep her underwater but Meryl never stops fighting and even removes James' mask. Eventually Meryl drowns and her parents immediately take her out. Maggie starts using CPR and cries when nothing happens, thinking she lost her daughter. However, after a few minutes, Meryl wakes up and confirms she isn't possessed anymore. Unfortunately, James is struggling to keep control of himself and tells Meryl and Maggie to run. Outside, the men come back and hide with the others in the stables. Arlo sees the jar with the liquid and says they need to leave, so Ruben tells everyone to go while he stays to wait for James and his family. As the group heads out, they see Valeria's body and Nicholas has a breakdown. At that moment Arlo hears a weird sound and runs away from the group. Once the assassin has taken over James, he comes out to look for victims. Ruben tackles him to start a fight, but James easily overpowers him and starts smashing his head on the ground. He's interrupted by Maggie shooting a warning shot right before Arlo calls for him. James follows the boy's voice and Maggie gets ready to shoot him, but she can't bring herself to do it. Then James enters the stables and goes upstairs where Arlo keeps him distracted while Maggie injects James with a sedative. Next she drags Arlo downstairs to escape until Arlo reminds her of the wasp in the teacup. Soon James comes downstairs too and tries to transfer the visitor to Maggie, who stabs him in the leg to make him back off. James easily recovers and attacks again, but Maggie is waiting and moves fast to push him inside a large freezer. He tries to keep her from closing the lid and Maggie is losing strength, however Ruben arrives and starts putting heavy things on top of the freezer to keep it closed. Meryl hears her father's screams and wants to free him, so Maggie has to pull her away. Eventually the screaming ends, indicating James is dead and the alien is now trapped. Afterward everybody drinks a bit of the rainbow liquid and walk over the blue line without getting hurt. However Ellen decides to stay to tend to the animals, hoping Maggie and the others will be back with a solution. After an emotional goodbye, the group leaves in Olsen's van. Moments later they find the road blocked by two friendly people who McNabb recognizes as part of the resistance group. Suddenly an orange car appears and runs over the duo, quickly killing them both. The driver is McNabb's previous partner who Travis replaced. There's a woman with him who explains the duo they just killed had been controlled by bad visitors and the driver proves it by opening their bags, revealing zip ties, sedatives, and a jar of rainbow liquid. The woman then tells them that the visitors are waking up all over the world and asks them to join the fight. Maggie says they aren't going anywhere until they explain what's happening. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.